What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and as usual, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video, where today we're going to be talking about a film I got to check out a little bit early ahead of its release on Netflix, and that film is called In Your Dreams. Directed by Alex Wu and co-directed by Erik Benson, this film stars people like Jolie, Hoang-Rappaport, Elias, Janssen, Simu, Cristin, Milioti, and more. And for anybody curious, this film is officially now, as of dropping this review and this weekend in general, out in theaters in a limited capacity, but will be hitting Netflix starting November 14th. So a big thanks to those kind folks over at Netflix for sending me over an early screener for this one. Going into it, I had no knowledge. I didn't watch a trailer, I didn't read a synopsis, I didn't do anything. So I went into it completely blind, other than the fact that the title gives away it has something to do with your dreams, and that it was an animated film. And I'm always a sucker for a good family picture, a good animated film, and the notion of something taking place in your dreams is always something I can appreciate. So as usual, before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's get into what this film is all about. 12-year-old Stevie and her 8-year-old brother Elliot discover a magical picture book which claims that the Sandman can make a dream come true. Faced with their parents' marriage troubles, they embark on a surreal journey through the dream realm to find and save their family. And I'll start this off by saying that I think that In Your Dreams is a perfectly enjoyable, safe movie for families and for kids that I would say in a lot of ways is just fine. I enjoyed myself watching this film. When I went on Letterboxd shortly after watching the film, I saw that my other peers who got to check out this film a little bit early had given this film some fairly middling reviews, mostly on the more negative side, and I walked out of it a little bit more positive, but not that much more positive. All in all, I think In Your Dreams is the kind of film that you can throw your kids in front of and they'll likely enjoy it. There's some nice messages and themes in there, but on a filmmaking level, I don't necessarily know that it's up to par when it comes down to a lot of the great films that come out every year from some of the major studios in the animation department. And I think even in the world of Netflix, with something like K-pop Demon Hunters earlier this year, this comes nowhere close to that level of quality. All in all, though, I did still find this film to be plenty enjoyable, and I found it to be a film that would likely be very relatable if you're like me and you're part of a household that had divorce in it. When I was incredibly young, my parents were divorced. I don't really even remember it happening. I was too young, so I've always known my parents to be divorced, but it was definitely something that messed with me when I was really young. You know, I would go to school and I'd see kids getting picked up by both parents, or I would see kids coming to some sort of assembly at the school and both their parents were together in an actual relationship versus them coming separately and maybe not being super close. My parents were always cool with one another, even if they disagreed or were not happy with one another, so I thankfully had a very peaceful divorced situation, but I know that's not the case for everybody, and I know that it's definitely something that weighs heavy on the, the minds and the hearts of kids who grow up like that, and I'm definitely no different. So watching this film, I could certainly relate to our two main leads in the film, Stevie and Elliot, as they are struggling with the idea of being separated, not only being separated in terms of their parents, but being separated possibly of the two of them, where they're still going to live together, or they're going to have to split everything in their lives. How's that all going to look? And that was something that definitely tugged on the heartstrings for me. Now, when it comes down to any animated film, one of the biggest things most people really care about is the animation. And I think all in all, In Your Dreams has some pretty solid animation that oftentimes is very colorful and vibrant, especially once we get into the dream realm. I really enjoyed the look and the feel of that world, and there was times where they were able to kind of go to portions of their dreams that were really fun and vibrant, most notably a sequence where they go to Breakfast Land or something to that degree, where all of the different people that they talk to in there are all different sorts of, food items that are part of breakfast. And I thought that was really fun, colorful, vibrant, and inventive. And I think when the film leans into that fun dream world and the various different dreams that our characters are having, even nightmares throughout the course of the film, that's where the film is at its best and allows the animation to shine. When it comes down to the animation across the board, though, I would be lying if I said I loved everything about it. There are moments in this film where there's just something about the faces of some of the characters, most notably our main character Stevie, that at times just felt kind of weird. The film is done by Netflix Animation alongside Cuckoo Studios, and you could definitely tell it just didn't have that same budget or that same vision. It felt like it was trying to be other kinds of safe 3D animated kinds of movies, and it didn't really feel like it had enough of its own stamp and its own identity stylistically to be something that really stands out. I just thought it was enjoyable enough, colorful, vibrant animation that was good, but when it came down to the emotion on the face sometimes, there was just something about it that was a little bit off. I don't want to use the term uncanny valley because I feel like that more has to do when you see like somebody who has like a CGI face in a live action film and it just kind of stands out, where it doesn't really look real but it's trying to look real. In the case of this, it's animated, so you can remove that, disbelief. You can suspend your disbelief a little bit more, but there was just something about the faces that just seemed a little bit off to me. But outside of that, I thought the animation was nice to look at, especially in the dream capacity. Now, where this film is going to work for some and not work for others, and I think mostly probably won't work for many, is in its narrative, because I do think that the film touches on some pretty real themes, some real dramatic elements about the notion of dealing with your parents possibly getting divorced and your life crumbling around you. And there is kind of this more realistic takeaway at a certain point throughout the course of the film, where our characters are having to come to the realization that, the dreams isn't going to be reality. The dream isn't going to be what your life will be, and you can't stay in the dream forever and expect that that's just going to be what life is. And so I kind of like that takeaway. It kind of felt like our characters had to come to a place of realization. And in a lot of ways, it felt like this film was maybe going to lean into the direction of being like, hey, life is hard sometimes, and sometimes these kind of things happen. And here's a story about why it's okay and how to maybe overcome these situations. But instead, I feel like the film does kind of pivot at a certain point and instead tries to go a little bit more happy-go-lucky, especially in the latter part of the film, in a way that I do think sometimes undercuts the themes that the film is playing out over the course of the film. That's not to say that the film still doesn't have good themes about handling something like this, but I do think that when it's trying to make a point, sometimes it undercuts itself to give yourself a little bit more of a rosy, happy ending, and I do think that this film could have found a little bit more of a balance. Outside of that, I do think there's a massive character development issue in this film. Our two main leads in the film, Stevie and Elliot, I think are handled well. I enjoyed that brother-sister dynamic. I thought that their chemistry, their dynamic was without a doubt the part I enjoyed the most. But when it comes down to their parents, and you have big names playing the parents, you have Simu and you have Cristin Milioti. When you have these two actors who are big names and you have them play the parents, you would think they would want to expand upon them a little bit more, since it's their falling out that's really causing this whole story for the kids. But they kind of just feel like they're on the back burner. They are just the painting in the backdrop of this story, where it's more about the fact that they're gonna split, and instead of really showing us why, maybe showing us a little bit more. There is obviously some context. They show you in small moments of dialogue why that is, and I almost think maybe artistically, or just as in terms of an artistic decision, the film was trying to kind of put it in the perspective of the kids, where they don't really fully understand why everything is happening the same way. But at the same time, I do think it left the parents in the background a little too often. And then by the end of the film, when the parents get incredibly involved, it feels like one of the biggest issues in this film really rises to the surface, which is the issue of our characters just kind of going with things. There is a big sense of convenience at times in this film, but there's also kind of this thing where like they discover this magical book and they're able to go to this magical dream realm, and there's this Sandman character and this nightmare character, and it just feels like the characters just like quickly get what's going on and roll with the punches, and it doesn't really feel like we get to see our characters figuring it out as much. And so with all that said, I don't think that this is a bad film. I think kids will probably enjoy it. I think it'll be a passable film that will pop up as new on Netflix, and families will throw it on, and I'm sure people will have plenty to say. I'm sure people who grew up in households of divorce will likely really relate to it. But by the time I got to the end of it, all I could really say was that was a cute, fine time. I enjoyed it. As somebody who grew up in a childhood home of divorce, I definitely was able to relate to it, but I will probably never watch this film again. I don't think this film is going to have a really big impact on the cultural zeitgeist of films coming out in this year. I think this will be one of those that just kind of gets lost on Netflix, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as I've seen some people say. I think it's just serviceable enough, and it just feels undercooked in a lot of other ways. I think this film could have been a lot more, and ultimately just turned out to be a fine animated film. So that's going to be my thoughts on In Your Dreams, and I want to hear what you guys have to say. Are you planning on checking this out? And if you have already checked it out, where do you fall on this one? Do you think it's just kind of on the lower side of animated films? Do you agree with me that it's enjoyable enough but just fine? Or did you find this film to be flat out bad? One character though, I will say before I wrap this up, that I did quite enjoy in the film, that I didn't even bring up here because I do think he's kind of an afterthought, but he was easily one of my favorite parts of the film, is a stuffed animal of the young brother in the film, Elias, who comes to life in their dreams, who is Tony Baloney, or Baloney Tony, I believe, who's played by Craig Robinson. And I found him to be a really fun and enjoyable character, and I do really wish they had utilized him more over the course of the film. So with all that said, that's going to be my thoughts on In Your Dreams, and I look forward to hearing from you guys down below. So hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more early reviews like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.